What happens when the
We have
galaxy's
to get
most
out of
advanced
there!
civilizations mistake
No, this
quiet
way!
strength for weakness? When a species
Help,
that
get
survived
back!
ice ages, plagues, and
Backing it
wars
up!
is dismissed as
Let me
fragile
go!
simply because they choose compassion over conquest. The Galactic Academy was about to learn that humans don't just endure, they excel.
I know you're worried, but I've
and
got this.
sometimes the
Trust
most
me.
dangerous
We're ready.
warriors are
Let's move
those who
out.
fight not for glory, but for the ones they love. This is the story of Maya Chen, a human who would redefine everything the galaxy thought they knew about Earth's children. Maya Chen stood at the edge of the transport platform,
Push forward!
her small
Don't
frame
stop!
dwarfed
We're with
by the
you!
towering
Enemy
alien
sight!
structures
Unleash
around her.
energy!
The Galactic Academy stretched before her like a crystal mountain, its bioluminescent walls pulsing with soft blues and greens.
No, we have to get
Students from
out!
dozens of
Move out of
species
the
moved
way!
through the corridors beyond the transparent barriers, their various forms creating a living tapestry of galactic diversity. The transport hummed beneath her feet as it glided silently through the station's approach vector. Other passengers barely glanced at her, which was exactly what Maya had grown accustomed to. At 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing barely 110 pounds, she looked more like a lost child than a Combat Academy candidate. "Attention passengers," the ship's AI announced in perfect galactic standard. "We are now approaching Kepler Station Academy. Please prepare for disembarkation. New students should report to Orientation Base 7 immediately upon arrival." A massive Carathian student sitting across from her shifted his bulk, accidentally bumping into Maya's seat. The 8-foot-tall reptilian creature was easily 4 times her mass, with scales that gleamed like polished obsidian. He glanced down at her with what might have been curiosity. "Human?" he rumbled in heavily accented standard. Maya nodded politely. "Yes." The Carathian's head tilted slightly, studying her with golden eyes that held an expression she'd seen countless times before. Pity mixed with confusion. "You are very small. Are you certain you are in the correct transport? This vessel is bound for the Combat Academy, not the civilian sectors." Before Maya could respond, a melodious laugh chimed from nearby. An Aurelian female, her gossamer wings catching the artificial light, floated closer to their conversation. The insectoid being's compound eyes sparkled with what Maya recognized as barely concealed amusement. "Oh, Crux!" the Aurelian said, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Don't you know? The humans insisted on equal representation in all academy programs. Their government demanded that they be allowed to participate in combat training despite their obvious limitations." Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being discussed as if she weren't present. She'd dealt with this attitude her entire life, first from other humans who saw her size and assumed weakness, and now from aliens who viewed her entire species as fragile. "The human mortality rate in combat programs has been quite concerning," continued the Aurelian, whose name tag read Skyweaver Zephaniah. 3 fatalities in the past year alone. One wonders why their leaders continue to send them to such unsuitable environments. The Carathian Crux looked genuinely concerned now, his massive head turned back to Maya. "Young human, perhaps you should consider a different path. The Academy medical programs are excellent, and humans have shown remarkable aptitude in healing arts. There is no shame in choosing a path that matches one's physical capabilities." Maya's hands rested calmly in her lap, but she could feel the old familiar fire beginning to kindle in her chest. It wasn't anger exactly, more like a deep, quiet determination that had carried her through 17 years of being underestimated. She looked up at both aliens with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her dark eyes. "Thank you for your concern," she said softly. "I appreciate that you're trying to help. But I think you might be surprised by what humans are capable of when circumstances require it." Zephaniah's wings fluttered in what Maya assumed was the Aurelian equivalent of a dismissive shrug. "Perhaps, though I fear the Academy instructors might disagree. Did you know that the Valdorian combat masters have begun implementing special human protocols to ensure student safety? Extra medical staff, modified training equipment, reduced physical requirements." She paused, her compound eyes glittering. "Some say it's quite expensive. The transport shuddered slightly as it entered the Academy's docking bay. Through the viewing ports, Maya could see the massive hangar filled with vessels from across the galaxy. Training platforms hung suspended in the artificial atmosphere, where students practiced aerial combat maneuvers. Even from this distance, she could see the fluid grace of experienced fighters moving through complex attack patterns. Final approach initiated, the AI announced. Students should gather their belongings and prepare for standard gravity orientation. Please note that Academy Standard is set to accommodate the median physical capabilities of enrolled species. Individuals requiring atmospheric or gravitational modification should report to student services immediately. Crux stood slowly, his massive frame unfolding like a living mountain. "Human Maya," he said, reading her name tag. "Perhaps we could speak more during orientation. I have studied your species somewhat, and while you lack the natural weapons of most sapient races, you have shown remarkable ingenuity in creating tools and strategies. There may be paths in the Academy that suit your particular talents." Maya gathered her single small bag and stood as well next to the towering Carathian. She looked even more fragile than before. "I think you're right about one thing," she said quietly. "Humans are definitely good at creating strategies. Sometimes the best strategy is simply to let others underestimate you while you figure out how to win." The transport settled into its berth with a gentle bump, and the doors hissed open to reveal the Academy's interior. The air was crisp and clean, with a faint metallic taste that spoke of advanced atmospheric processing. Students moved through the corridors with purpose, their various forms creating a symphony of colors, shapes, and movement. Maya stepped onto the platform and immediately felt the difference in gravity. Academy Standard was roughly 1.2 times Earth normal, designed to challenge most species without being overwhelming. For Maya, who had trained her entire life in Earth's gravity, it felt like being pressed down by invisible hands. She saw Zephania struggling slightly as well, her delicate wings working harder to maintain her preferred floating height. Crux seemed unaffected, his homeworld apparently having heavier gravity than Academy Standard. "Orientation Bay 7 is this direction," announced a holographic guide that materialized near the exit. The projection was clearly designed to be neutral and non-threatening, a simple geometric form that pulsed with gentle light. New combat students should follow the blue pathway markers to complete their initial assessments. As they walked through the corridors, Maya became increasingly aware of the stares and whispers that followed her. Students from dozens of species paused their conversations to watch the small human pass by. Some looked curious, others concerned, and a few seemed openly skeptical. "Is that really a human?" she heard someone whisper in Thrakari. "She looks so young," came another voice in Zelvan. "Are we certain she's reached her species' maturity?" "I heard humans only live for 80 standard years," said a third voice in heavily accented Standard. "No wonder they're so desperate to prove themselves. They barely have time to develop real skills." Maya kept walking, her expression calm and pleasant. She'd learned long ago that reacting to such comments only made things worse. Better to save her energy for when it really mattered. Orientation Bay 7 turned out to be a massive amphitheater carved from what looked like a single piece of dark crystal. Hundreds of students had already gathered, their diverse forms creating a fascinating display of galactic biology. Maya counted at least 20 different species, from the familiar bipedal forms of Carathians and Aurelians to the more exotic crystalline structures of the Netherian collective consciousness. At the center of the amphitheater stood a figure that made even the largest students look small. Instructor Valdorian Prime was nearly 9 feet tall, with the characteristic iron-gray skin and bony ridges that marked his species as one of the galaxy's most feared warrior races. His 4 arms moved with fluid precision as he adjusted holographic displays, and his 3 eyes scanned the assembled students with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "Students," his voice boomed through the amphitheater without any apparent amplification, "welcome to the Galactic Academy Combat Division. You are here because your respective governments believe you have the potential to serve as protectors of galactic peace. Over the next 4 years, we will determine whether that belief is justified." His central eye fixed on a group of Thrakari students, each one standing nearly 7 feet tall with natural armor plating covering their bodies. Some of you come from warrior traditions spanning millennia. You have been bred and trained for combat since birth. You believe this gives you an advantage? The eye moved to scan the Korathian contingent. Others among you possess natural physical gifts that would make you formidable opponents in any conflict. Enhanced strength, natural weapons, redundant organ systems that make you nearly impossible to kill through conventional means. Finally, his gaze swept over the smaller students, including Maya. She felt the weight of his attention like a physical presence, though his expression remained neutral. And some of you, he continued, come from species that the galaxy has learned to respect not for your physical prowess but for your other qualities. Intelligence, creativity, stubbornness that borders on insanity. A pause. You are all here for the same reason, to prove that you can protect others when circumstances demand it. He gestured and holographic displays materialized throughout the amphitheater, showing combat scenarios from across the galaxy. Ships burning in the void, ground battles on alien worlds, rescue operations in hostile environments. The galaxy is not a peaceful place, Prime continued. Pirates raid shipping lanes. Slavers target vulnerable populations, and territorial disputes between worlds can escalate into conflicts that threaten millions of lives. The Academy exists to train individuals capable of responding to these threats. Maya watched the holographic battles with professional interest. She'd studied military history since childhood, fascinated by the strategic and tactical innovations that had emerged from conflict. Human military doctrine was still relatively new to galactic thinking, but it had already influenced several major theoretical developments. Your initial assessments will begin immediately, Prime announced. You will be evaluated in 4 categories: physical capability, tactical reasoning, technical aptitude, and psychological resilience. These assessments are not competitions. They are diagnostic tools designed to identify your strengths and areas for development. The amphitheater began to shift around them, the crystal walls flowing like liquid to create smaller training areas. Maya found herself in a group with roughly 20 other students, including Crux and Zephaniah. Their evaluator was a smaller Valdorian who introduced herself as Instructor Beta. Physical assessment first, Beta announced, her voice carrying the same commanding presence as Prime's. This is not about comparing your abilities to other species. Each of you will be measured against the baseline capabilities of your own people. Maya felt a moment of relief. Human baseline standards were significantly lower than most galactic species, which meant she wouldn't be expected to match Korathian strength or Thrakari durability. What the instructor probably didn't realize was that Maya had never been content with baseline human capabilities. The first test was simple: lifting capacity relative to body weight. Students approached a device that looked like a sophisticated combination of lever and pulley system. The machine would calibrate to their species' average strength and measure how much above or below that average they performed. Crux went first, easily lifting nearly twice his own body weight. The machine hummed approvingly and displayed his results in glowing numerals above the device. Exceptional, Beta noted, making marks on a digital tablet. Standard Korathian baseline is 0.7 times body weight. Student Crux achieves 1.8 times. Very impressive. Zephaniah approached next, but her evaluation was different. As a flying species, her test involved aerial maneuvers and wing strength rather than ground-based lifting. She performed admirably, executing complex flight patterns that demonstrated both speed and agility. Human student Maya Chen, Beta called. Maya approached the machine, acutely aware that every other student was watching. The device scanned her briefly, then reconfigured itself for human physiology. According to the display, baseline human lifting capacity was approximately 0.5 times body weight for her age and gender. Maya gripped the handles and began to lift. The resistance was significant but manageable. She could hear murmurs from the other students as the weight increased. 0.5 times her weight, 0.7. 0.9. She kept lifting, her breathing steady and controlled. The murmurs grew louder as she passed human baseline by a significant margin, 1.2 times her body weight. 1.5. At 1.7 times her weight, she finally reached her limit and set the bar down gently. The amphitheater had gone completely silent. Beta stared at her tablet, then at Maya, then back at the tablet. "Student Chen," she said slowly, "your results indicate lifting capacity more than 3 times the baseline for your species and gender. Please confirm that you have not undergone genetic modification or mechanical enhancement." Maya shook her head. "No modifications, instructor. I've just trained consistently since childhood." She could see the confusion on the faces around her. Crux looked genuinely impressed, while Zephaniah's compound eyes were wide with surprise. Other students whispered among themselves in languages Maya didn't recognize, but their tones suggested astonishment. "Remarkable," Beta muttered, making extensive notes. "Human physiology continues to surprise our researchers. Very well. Proceed to cardiovascular assessment." The next test involved running on what appeared to be an adaptive treadmill that adjusted its surface and incline based on species-specific parameters. Maya watched as other students performed their assessments, noting the machine's calibration for each species. When her turn came, the machine configured itself for human parameters. The baseline test appeared to be a simple endurance run. Maintain a steady pace for a predetermined distance while the machine monitored heart rate, breathing efficiency, and muscular fatigue indicators. Maya began running at what felt like a comfortable pace for her. The machine gradually increased speed and incline, testing her ability to adapt to changing conditions. As the test progressed, she became aware of the growing silence around the testing area. At the 5-minute mark, she was still maintaining steady breathing and consistent stride. At 10 minutes, her heart rate had increased but remained well within acceptable ranges. At 15 minutes, students from other testing groups had begun to gather around her station. "How long is this test supposed to last?" she heard someone ask. "Typical human endurance baseline is 8 to 12 minutes at this intensity level," Beta replied, her voice showing clear puzzlement. "Student Chen has been running for 17 minutes with no signs of significant fatigue." Maya could feel the attention of the entire group now, but she kept her focus on the rhythm of her breathing and the steady impact of her feet on the machine's surface. This was something she'd been doing since she was 8 years old, running through the hills around her family's home until her lungs burned and her legs ached, then running just a little bit more. At 23 minutes, the machine finally began its cool-down cycle. Maya slowed gradually, breathing deeply but not gasping. When she stepped off the treadmill, the testing area erupted in surprised chatter. Beta approached her with the expression of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Student Chen, your endurance performance exceeds human baseline by a factor of nearly 3. Combined with your strength assessment, these results are highly irregular. Are you certain you represent typical human physical development?" Maya wiped sweat from her forehead with a small towel. "I think I might be a bit above average for my age group," she said modestly, "but I'm not unusual for humans who train seriously. We have athletes who perform much better than this." "Athletes?" Crux rumbled, approaching with obvious curiosity. "You mean professional warriors? Not warriors exactly," Maya explained. "On Earth, we have competitive sports and fitness training that many people participate in for fun or personal development. Some humans spend years training just to see how fast they can run a certain distance, or how much weight they can lift, or how long they can keep going without stopping." The concept seemed to confuse several of the alien students. Zephaniah's wings fluttered in what Maya was beginning to recognize as the Aurelian equivalent of a confused headshake. "You train for combat performance without the purpose of combat?" she asked. "Why would anyone subject themselves to such hardship without necessity?" Maya considered how to explain the human concept of challenge for its own sake, of pushing personal limits not for survival but for the simple satisfaction of improvement. It was clearly a foreign concept to most of the species represented here. "Humans like to test themselves," she said finally. "We enjoy seeing what we're capable of when we really try. Sometimes the process of becoming stronger or faster or more enduring is rewarding even if we never need to use those abilities." Beta made more notes on her tablet. Fascinating. This may explain the discrepancies in human performance data. Previous academy assessments may have been conducted on humans without specialized physical preparation. The third assessment was tactical reasoning, conducted through holographic scenario simulations. Students were presented with various combat situations and asked to develop strategies for achieving specific objectives while minimizing casualties and collateral damage. Maya found herself genuinely enjoying this portion of the evaluation. The scenarios were complex and multi-layered, requiring consideration of terrain, available resources, enemy capabilities, and civilian populations. Each student was given the same basic situation but allowed to approach it from their own species' tactical traditions. The first scenario involved defending a civilian evacuation site from pirate raiders. Students had access to limited defensive resources and a small number of trained security personnel. The goal was to hold the position long enough for evacuation ships to arrive and depart safely. Maya studied the holographic representation carefully, noting defensive positions, sightlines, and potential approach routes for enemy forces. Most of the other students seemed to focus on direct confrontation strategies, meet the enemy in open battle and defeat them through superior firepower or hand-to-hand combat. Her approach was different. Instead of trying to fight the pirates in a conventional engagement, she focused on making the target appear less valuable than the cost of taking it. She positioned her limited forces to create the illusion of stronger defenses while setting up tactical retreats that would draw enemy forces away from the actual evacuation site. Student Chen, Beta called after reviewing her submission, "Your strategy is unconventional. You appear to be avoiding direct confrontation entirely. Can you explain your reasoning?" Maya nodded. "The objective isn't to defeat the pirates, it's to protect the civilians. A direct fight would likely result in casualties on both sides, and there's no guarantee we could win against superior numbers. But if we can make the pirates think the target isn't worth the cost, or if we can delay them long enough, we achieve the actual goal without unnecessary bloodshed." Several students looked confused by this approach. A Thrakari warrior named Bladestrike spoke up, his voice carrying the aggressive undertones typical of his species. "This is cowardice disguised as tactics," he declared. "A warrior faces enemies directly and defeats them through strength and skill. Hiding and running brings shame to any fighter." Maya turned to face him calmly. "With respect, Bladestrike, the objective isn't to prove we're brave warriors. It's to make sure innocent people don't die. If my family was in that evacuation site, I wouldn't care whether the people protecting them fought honorably. I just want them to survive." "And what happens when the pirates realize they've been deceived?" challenged another student, a crystalline Netherian whose voice resonated like crystal chimes. "Do they not simply return later with greater force?" "That's possible," Maya acknowledged. "But by then the civilians are safely away, and we can meet the pirates on ground of our choosing with proper preparation. The goal is to buy time and minimize casualties, not to win every possible fight." Beta made extensive notes throughout the discussion. Student Chen's approach demonstrates classical human tactical thinking, asymmetric warfare, strategic deception, and objective-focused rather than honor-focused decision-making. This is consistent with human military history and represents a valid alternative to direct confrontation doctrines. The final assessment was psychological resilience, conducted through a combination of stress simulations and response scenarios designed to test mental flexibility under pressure. Students faced holographic situations involving moral dilemmas, resource scarcity, and high-stress decision-making. Maya's first scenario involved leading a damaged ship with limited life support systems. The simulation indicated that current resources would support either the full crew for 3 days or half the crew for 7 days, with rescue uncertain in either time frame. Most students approach this as a resource allocation problem, developing various systems for determining which crew members would receive life support priority. Their solutions generally focused on rank, essential skills, or survival probability. Maya's approach was different again. Instead of accepting the scenario's apparent limitations, she questioned the assumptions. She examined the ship's systems, investigated alternative power sources, and looked for ways to reduce life support requirements across the board. Student Chen, Beta interrupted her analysis, you appear to be attempting to modify the fundamental parameters of the scenario. The simulation clearly indicates that life support resources are fixed and cannot be increased. Maya looked up from the holographic ship schematics she'd been studying. I understand the scenario as presented, instructor, but in a real emergency, wouldn't we want to explore every possible option before accepting that people have to die? These systems show several possibilities for extending life support through power redistribution and atmospheric recycling optimization. The scenario is designed to test your decision-making under absolute constraints, Beta explained. The point is to determine how you would choose which crew members to save when saving everyone is impossible. But what if it's not impossible? Maya asked. What if it just requires thinking about the problem differently? In human history, some of our greatest victories came from refusing to accept that a situation was hopeless when everyone else thought it was. Beta exchanged glances with Instructor Prime, who had approached to observe the final assessments. Prime's three eyes studied Maya with an expression that might have been curiosity. Student Chen, he rumbled, you consistently demonstrate a reluctance to accept limitations that other species consider absolute. Is this a common human trait? Maya considered the question carefully. I think humans have a tendency to push boundaries, yes. We've survived as a species by adapting to hostile environments and finding solutions to problems that seemed impossible. Our planet taught us that giving up usually means dying, so we developed a culture that values persistence and creative problem-solving. And if your creative problem-solving fails? Prime pressed. If you find yourself in a situation where someone must die and your optimism cannot change that reality, the question hung in the air like a challenge. Maya felt the weight of every student's attention focused on her response. This was clearly the real test, the moment where her humanity would either prove itself worthy or reveal its fundamental inadequacy for the harsh realities of galactic conflict. If I truly reached a point where I had no other options, she said slowly, then I would make whatever choice saved the most lives. But I would never stop looking for a better solution, even while implementing the necessary one, and I would carry the weight of that choice for the rest of my life, because that's what makes the decision meaningful. Prime nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Interesting. Most warrior species view such emotional attachment to necessary decisions as a weakness that clouds judgment. Maybe it is a weakness, Maya admitted, but it's also what motivates us to fight so hard to avoid having to make those decisions in the first place. Humans who don't feel the weight of those choices tend to make them too easily. The assessments concluded as the artificial day cycle began to dim in the academy's corridors. Students dispersed to their assigned quarters, chattering among themselves about their experiences. Maya found herself walking alongside Crux and Zephaniah, who seemed to have appointed themselves as her informal guides. You performed quite differently than expected, Zephaniah observed, her melodious voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity rather than dismissal. The instructors seemed intrigued by your responses. Crux nodded his massive head. Your physical capabilities far exceeded the data we have been given about human potential, and your tactical approaches were unlike anything I have studied in Korathian military academies. Do all humans think in such indirect patterns? Maya smiled tiredly. I think humans just approach problems from different angles than most species. We're not the strongest or fastest or most durable, so we've had to get good at finding advantages in unexpected places. The instructors mentioned that human military doctrine has influenced several galactic strategic developments, Zephaniah noted. Perhaps there is more to your species' approach than the academic literature suggests. As they reached the dormitory levels, Maya felt a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. The first day had gone better than she dared to hope, but she knew it was only the beginning. The real challenges would come when theory became practice and her fellow students discovered what a determined human was truly capable of. Thank you both for being so welcoming, she told her new companions. I know having a human in your class probably wasn't what you expected. Crux's laugh was a sound like distant thunder. Young Maya, I suspect you will be full of surprises that none of us expect. I look forward to seeing what tomorrow's training brings." As Maya settled into her small but comfortable quarters, she reflected on the day's events. She'd proven that humans could exceed expectations in controlled assessments, but the real test would come when those abilities were put to use in actual training scenarios. She had a feeling that her classmates were about to learn some very interesting lessons about underestimating Earth's children. Outside her window, the Academy's training grounds stretched into the artificial distance, illuminated by the soft glow of practice areas where advanced students worked through complex combat scenarios. Soon she would be out there with them, showing the galaxy that sometimes the most dangerous opponents were the ones who fought not for glory or honor, but simply because someone needed to be protected. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to surprise her instructors and classmates. Maya Chen was ready for all of them. The Academy's training facility hummed with activity as first-year students gathered for their initial combat instruction. Maya arrived early, as was her habit, and found herself alone in the vast preparation chamber. The room itself was a marvel of galactic engineering. Adaptive gravity fields, programmable terrain, and atmospheric controls that could simulate dozens of different world environments. She was stretching near one of the equipment lockers when other students began filtering in. The conversations were a mixture of excitement and nervousness, with students from various species discussing their expectations for real combat training. Maya noticed that several groups had formed along species lines, which wasn't particularly surprising given the natural tendency for similar beings to cluster together. "Attention, students!" Instructor Prime's voice echoed through the chamber as his massive form entered the room. "Today marks the beginning of your practical combat education. You will be divided into mixed species teams and given scenarios designed to test not only your individual capabilities, but your ability to function as a cohesive unit." Maya felt a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. This was what she'd been preparing for her entire life, even if she hadn't realized it at the time. Every hour spent training in her family's makeshift gym, every mile run through mountain trails, every martial arts class and tactical study session had been building toward this moment. "Team assignments are based on preliminary assessments," Prine continued, gesturing to holographic displays that materialized throughout the room. "You will notice that teams are intentionally diverse, combining different species' strengths and tactical approaches. The goal is not to create perfect fighting units, but to teach you how to adapt and support teammates whose capabilities may be radically different from your own." Maya located her team designation and felt her heart sink slightly. Team 7 consisted of herself, Bladestrike the Thrakari warrior, an Etherian crystalline entity called Resonance, and an Aurelian named Swiftwind. It was almost as if the instructors had deliberately chosen the most challenging possible combination. Bladestrike approached the team gathering point with obvious displeasure. His armored hide gleamed under the chamber's lighting, and his natural weapons extended and retracted in what Maya was beginning to recognize as a sign of agitation. "This is unacceptable," he declared in his harsh, grating voice. "I am to be partnered with the fragile human, a flying insect, and a living rock formation? How are we expected to function as a combat unit?" Resonance's crystalline form chimed softly, the sound somehow conveying calm amusement. Effective combinations often emerge from unexpected elements. This unit suggests observation before condemnation. Swiftwind, the Aurelian, hovered slightly above the group with her gossamer wings creating subtle air currents. "I must admit to some concern myself," she said in her melodious voice. "Our team composition seems quite unbalanced." Maya looked at her three teammates with growing determination. She'd spent her life proving that appearances could be deceiving, and this was simply another opportunity to demonstrate that principle on a larger scale. "Maybe we should focus on what each of us can do well," she suggested, "instead of worrying about what we can't do. Every team composition has advantages if we're creative about finding them." Bladestrike's laugh was a sound like grinding stone. "What advantages could you possibly offer, little human? You possess no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced senses. You are a liability that will require protection rather than providing support. Before Maya could respond, Instructor Beta approached their group. The Valdorian's multiple arms carried various pieces of equipment, which she began distributing to team members. Team 7, she announced, your first scenario will be a hostage rescue operation. Pirates have taken control of a civilian transport and are holding passengers aboard a damaged vessel in hostile space. Your objectives are to neutralize the threat, secure the hostages, and extract all civilians safely. She handed each team member a tablet displaying mission details. Maya studied the information carefully, noting the ship's layout, estimated enemy numbers, and the various complications that made a direct assault problematic. The vessel is structurally compromised, Beta continued. Excessive force could trigger catastrophic decompression. The pirates are heavily armed but appear to be motivated primarily by monetary gain rather than ideological commitment. You have access to standard academy training equipment and a small assault shuttle. Maya absorbed the details while listening to her teammates' immediate reactions. Blade Strike was already planning a frontal assault through the main docking bay. Swiftwind suggested an aerial infiltration through the ship's damaged sections. Resonance proposed using its natural electromagnetic abilities to disable the ship's systems. Wait! Maya interjected as her teammates began moving toward the equipment lockers. Can we think through this together before we commit to individual approaches? We might be more effective if we coordinate our different capabilities. Blade Strike turned to stare at her with obvious impatience. Human, you have no experience with actual combat operations. Leave the tactical planning to those equipped for warfare. Maya felt the familiar fire building in her chest, but she kept her voice level and reasonable. You're right that I don't have combat experience, but I've studied hostage situations extensively, and I think there might be some aspects of this scenario that we should consider more carefully. Such as? Swiftwind asked, her tone suggesting polite skepticism rather than genuine interest. Maya pulled up a holographic display of the ship's layout and began highlighting specific areas. Look at the passenger distribution. The pirates have gathered most hostages in the central cargo bay, which is the most structurally sound part of the ship, but they've left smaller groups scattered in other sections. She zoomed in on the ship's damage reports. The hull breaches are here, here, and here, she continued, marking locations with her finger. But notice that they're all in sections where no hostages are being held. The pirates chose their positions carefully to maintain structural integrity. Resonance's crystalline form shifted slightly, creating new harmonic frequencies. Human entity demonstrates strategic perception. Pirate positioning suggests intelligence and planning rather than random opportunism. Quote, which means they're probably expecting a rescue attempt and have planned accordingly. A direct assault would play right into their preparations. Blade Strike's natural weapons extended fully. A sign Maya was learning indicated extreme frustration. Then what do you suggest, tactician? That we simply ask them politely to release the hostages? Maya smiled, and for the first time since meeting her teammates, she let a hint of her inner determination show in her expression. Actually, I'm thinking we might want to convince them that keeping the hostages isn't worth the trouble. She manipulated the holographic display to show the ship's power and life support systems. Swiftwind, your aerial capabilities would let you access the external maintenance ports here and here. If you could create controlled failures in non-essential systems, we could make it look like the ship is deteriorating faster than it actually is. Swiftwind's compound eyes glittered with sudden interest, creating the illusion of imminent catastrophic failure. Meanwhile, Maya continued, Resonance could use electromagnetic interference to disrupt their communications without completely disabling them. We want them to be able to call for help, but we want them to be able to call for help when they rested. Resonance chimed approvingly. Selective interference patterns would create appearance of growing isolation while maintaining basic functionality. Maya turned to Blade Strike, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. And that's where your combat capabilities become crucial. We need someone who can respond immediately if the pirates decide to take their frustration out on the hostages. You'd be our insurance against the plan going wrong. Blade Strike was quiet for a long moment, his three eyes studying the tactical display. You propose to defeat them without fighting them? I propose to make fighting unnecessary by changing the cost-benefit analysis of their situation, Maya corrected. Pirates are essentially business people with weapons. If we can convince them that holding hostages costs more than releasing them, they'll choose the profitable option. Beta, who had been observing their planning session, approached with her tablet ready to record their chosen strategy. Team 7, please confirm your operational approach for the hostage rescue scenario. Bladestrike looked at his teammates, his expression still skeptical but no longer dismissive. We will attempt the human's deception strategy, he announced. If it fails, we will resort to direct assault. The simulation began with Team 7 aboard their assigned assault shuttle, approaching the damaged civilian transport. Maya found herself in the role of tactical coordinator, a position that felt both natural and terrifying. Her teammates were taking her suggestions seriously now, but that meant the responsibility for success or failure rested largely on her shoulders. Swiftwind, are you ready for external approach? She asked through the team's communication system. Affirmative. External maintenance ports are clearly visible. Beginning approach to designated targets. Through the shuttle's viewports, Maya could see the Aurelian's graceful form moving through space with only minimal thruster assistance. Her natural flying abilities adapted for three-dimensional movement made her remarkably effective in zero-gravity environments. Resonance, electromagnetic interference on my mark, Maya continued. Interference patterns calculated and ready for implementation. Maya watched the tactical displays as Swiftwind reached the first maintenance port. The Aurelian's delicate manipulators worked with surprising efficiency, accessing the ship's external systems with minimal disturbance. Beginning Phase 1, Swiftwind reported, creating cascade failure in secondary power grid. On the damaged transport's bridge, Maya could see through their surveillance feeds that the pirates were beginning to notice system failures. Their leader, a scarred break-in with cybernetic implants, was barking orders at his subordinates as warning lights began flashing throughout the ship. Resonance. Initiate communication interference, Maya ordered. Implementing selective electromagnetic disruption. Communications degraded but not eliminated. The effect was exactly what Maya had hoped for. The pirates could still communicate with each other and attempt to call for support, but their transmissions were filled with static and dropouts. Every conversation sounded desperate and unclear. Phase 2, Swiftwind, Maya called. Acknowledged. Beginning life support fluctuations. The atmospheric indicators on the pirate ship began showing irregular readings. Not dangerous levels, but enough to suggest that the vessel's damaged systems were continuing to deteriorate. Maya watched as the pirate leader's confident demeanor began to show cracks of concern. Bladestrike, move into position near the main cargo bay, Maya instructed. If this goes wrong, we'll need immediate response capability. The Thrakari warrior moved through the shuttle's corridors with surprising stealth for such a large being. His natural armor provided protection against small arms fire, and his multiple natural weapons made him a formidable opponent in close combat. Position achieved, he reported. I can see the hostage area through the damaged sections. Pirates appear agitated but not yet panicked. Maya monitored the pirate communications as their situation continued to deteriorate. The cascade failures were creating exactly the impression she'd hoped for, a ship in terminal decline with systems failing faster than repairs could address them. Unknown vessel, the pirate leader's voice crackled through the interference. This is Captain Scarl of the independent merchant vessel Freedom's Edge. We are experiencing critical system failures and require immediate assistance. Maya smiled at the deliberate misdirection. Pirates rarely identified themselves accurately when calling for help. She activated the communication link to respond, but modulated her voice through the shuttle systems to disguise her youth and humanity. Freedom's Edge, this is Galactic Patrol Vessel Steadfast, she transmitted. We are responding to distress calls in this sector, but our nearest available rescue unit is 6 hours from your location. Can you maintain life support systems until arrival? The pause before Scarl's response told Maya everything she needed to know about his mental state. 6 hours was far too long for a ship showing signs of imminent catastrophic failure. Steadfast, our situation is deteriorating rapidly, Scarl replied. We have civilian passengers aboard and may need immediate evacuation assistance. Maya felt her pulse quicken with excitement. The pirate captain was beginning to see his hostages as a liability rather than an asset. People he would need to keep alive and safe during an emergency evacuation rather than valuable bargaining chips. Understood, Freedom's Edge. Be advised that our rescue protocols require verification of passenger welfare before extraction operations can begin. Can you confirm that all civilians are unharmed and prepared for emergency evacuation? Another pause, longer this time. Maya could imagine Scarl weighing his options as his ship continued to show signs of failure around him. Swift wind, increase the atmospheric fluctuation slightly, she ordered. Nothing dangerous, just enough to keep them nervous. Acknowledged, implementing additional variations in secondary life support systems. The effect was visible through their surveillance feeds as pirates throughout the ship began showing increased agitation. Several were arguing with their leader, gesturing toward the failing systems and the growing number of warning indicators. Steadfast, Scarl's voice returned, now carrying clear notes of stress. We are prepared to transfer passengers to your custody for emergency evacuation. Confirm your approach vector and docking procedures. Maya felt a surge of triumph, but she kept her voice professionally calm. Confirmed. Freedom's Edge. Initiating approach for passenger transfer. Please have all civilians gathered at the primary docking bay and ready for immediate evacuation. She switched to internal communications. Team 7, prepare for passenger extraction. Blade Strike, maintain overwatch position. Swiftwind, be ready to disengage external systems. Resonance, maintain communication interference until all hostages are secure. The extraction itself proceeded with remarkable efficiency. The pirates, faced with what appeared to be a deteriorating emergency and the arrival of what they believed were Galactic Patrol rescue personnel, cooperated fully with passenger transfer procedures. Maya watched through the docking bay cameras as frightened civilians were escorted aboard their shuttle by pirates who seemed genuinely concerned for their welfare. All passengers secured, Blade Strike reported from his position. Pirates are requesting immediate evacuation assistance for their own personnel. Maya made a quick decision. Inform them that we're dispatching additional rescue vessels, but our current shuttle is at capacity with the civilian evacuation. They should maintain position and await further assistance. Within 30 minutes, all hostages were safely aboard Team 7's shuttle, and the pirates were left with their damaged ship, believing that rescue was on the way for them as well. Maya waited until they were well clear of the transport before allowing herself to really believe that her strategy had worked. Simulation complete, Instructor Beta's voice announced through the shuttle's communications. All objectives achieved with 0 casualties and minimal use of force. Excellent work, Team 7. Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her as the training environment began to fade around them. They were back in the Academy's simulation chamber, surrounded by other teams who had approached the same scenario with various degrees of success. Blade Strike was the first to break the silence among her teammates. Human Maya, he said slowly, your tactical approach was... Bidding Redding. I confess that I did not expect such competence from someone lacking combat experience. Swiftwind's wings fluttered in what Maya was beginning to recognize as impressed surprise. The strategy utilized each team member's capabilities optimally while minimizing risk to both hostages and rescue personnel. It was quite elegant, Resonance chimed approvingly. Human entity demonstrates strategic thinking patterns previously unobserved in this unit's experience. Cooperation achieved optimal results through creative problem solving. But she also realized that this was just the beginning. The simulation had been designed to test their ability to work together, and they'd succeeded largely because the scenario played to her particular strengths. Real combat situations might prove far more challenging. Thank you all, she said sincerely. But I want to be clear that this worked because each of you was willing to trust an approach that probably seemed crazy at first. Swiftwind's technical skills, Resonance's electromagnetic abilities, and Blade Strike's combat readiness were all essential to making the strategy work. Instructor Prime approached their team as other groups completed their scenarios. His three eyes studied them with an expression that might have been approval. "Team 7, he rumbled, "your approach to the hostage scenario was unconventional but highly effective. Student Chen, your tactical coordination demonstrated several principles of human military doctrine that we have observed in historical studies. Can you explain your reasoning process?" Maya felt suddenly self-conscious as students from other teams gathered around to listen. She tried to avoid drawing too much attention to herself, but apparently that was no longer possible. "I think humans approach conflict differently because we're usually at a physical disadvantage," she began carefully. "We've learned to look for solutions that don't require us to be stronger or faster or more durable than our opponents. Instead, we try to change the nature of the problem so that those advantages become less relevant." "And if your deception had been discovered?" Prime pressed. "What would have been your response?" Maya glanced at Bladestrike, who nodded slightly. "Then we would have had to fight," she admitted. "But we were prepared for that possibility, and we had positioned ourselves to maximize our effectiveness in a direct confrontation if it became necessary." "Interesting," Prime mused. "Many warrior traditions view deception as dishonorable, yet your approach achieved all objectives with minimal risk to all parties involved. This raises questions about the nature of honor in conflict resolution." A Thrakari student from another team stepped forward, his armor plates shifting in clear agitation. "Instructor Prime, surely you cannot endorse such cowardly tactics? True warriors face their enemies directly and defeat them through superior skill and courage." Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being challenged, but before she could respond, Bladestrike moved to her side. "Gratok," the Thrakari warrior addressed his fellow species member, "I too believed such principles before today, but I observed that Student Chen's cowardly tactics required precise timing, careful coordination, and the courage to attempt something that could have failed catastrophically." There was nothing cowardly in her actions. The exchange seemed to surprise everyone present, including Maya. She hadn't expected Bladestrike to defend her approach, especially not to another member of his own species. "Furthermore," Bladestrike continued, "her strategy achieved victory without requiring anyone to prove their combat prowess through violence. The hostages were saved, the pirates were neutralized, and no one was harmed. What definition of honor requires unnecessary bloodshed when objectives can be achieved through superior tactics?" Prime nodded slowly, his multiple arms folding behind his back. "This debate touches on fundamental questions about the nature of conflict and the responsibilities of those who wield power. We will explore these concepts in greater detail as your training progresses." He turned to address the entire group of students. "Today's exercises have revealed interesting patterns in tactical thinking among different species. Some teams achieve their objectives through direct assault, others through stealth and infiltration, and still others through creative problem-solving. All approaches have merit in appropriate circumstances." Maya listened as Prime summarized the various team performances, noting that most groups had chosen variations of direct confrontation. Team 7's approach had been unique among the first-year students, though apparently not unprecedented in academy history. "Your next training exercise will be conducted individually," Prime announced. "Each student will face a scenario designed to test their personal combat capabilities under stress. Unlike today's team exercise, you will not be able to rely on teammates to compensate for individual limitations." Maya felt a flutter of nervousness at this announcement. Team coordination had allowed her to contribute through tactical planning and strategy, but individual combat assessment would test her physical capabilities directly against academy standards. As students began filing out of the simulation chamber, Swiftwind approached Maya with an expression of curiosity. "Maya," the Aurelian said, "I find myself wondering about human military training. Do all humans learn to think tactically as you demonstrated today?" Maya considered the question carefully. "Not all humans serve in military roles, but we do have a culture that values strategic thinking and problem-solving. Many of our games and sports involve tactical elements, and we study historical conflicts as part of our general education." "Games?" Resonance chimed. Its crystalline form shifting to indicate interest. "Human recreational activities involve strategic simulation?" Some do, Maya confirmed. We have games that simulate everything from individual combat to large-scale warfare, usually without actual violence. Many humans play them for entertainment, but they also help develop strategic thinking skills. Crux, who had been listening from nearby, approached with his characteristic rumbling laugh. Young Maya, your species continues to surprise us. You prepare for warfare through play and achieve victory through deception. No wonder the galactic military academies struggle to understand human capabilities. As the day's training concluded, Maya found herself walking back to the dormitories with a group that had grown to include several students from other teams. The conversation ranged from tactical theory to species-specific advantages in combat, and she noticed that she was being treated as a contributing participant rather than a curiosity to be observed. Maya asked a Zelvan student whose skin patterns shifted through various colors, "Do you believe your approach today could work against opponents who were specifically prepared for human tactical deception?" It was a thoughtful question that got to the heart of tactical adaptation. Maya considered it carefully as they walked through the academy's corridors. "Probably not exactly the same approach," she admitted. "But that's the thing about tactical thinking. It's not about memorizing specific strategies. It's about learning to see problems from different angles and adapt to changing circumstances. If an opponent expects me to use deception, then maybe the best approach is direct action. The key is staying flexible and not becoming predictable." Bladestrike nodded approvingly. "This is wisdom that extends beyond combat tactics. A true warrior must be capable of adaptation rather than merely following predetermined patterns." As they reached the dormitory levels, Maya reflected on the day's events. She'd proven that she could contribute meaningfully to a team effort, but individual assessment would present different challenges. Still, for the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt like she was among peers rather than skeptical observers. The next phase of training would test whether her individual capabilities could match her strategic thinking, but Maya was no longer worried about whether she belonged at the academy. Today had demonstrated that different didn't necessarily mean inferior, and that human approaches to conflict had value even in a galaxy full of warriors bred for battle. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Maya was ready to face them with the quiet confidence that had carried her through a lifetime of being underestimated. Her classmates were beginning to learn that there was more to humans than initially met the eye, and her instructors were documenting tactical approaches that hadn't been seen in academy training before. As she settled into her quarters for the evening, Maya looked forward to the individual assessment that would come next. It was time to show the galaxy what a human could accomplish when fighting alone, using nothing but determination, creativity, and the combat skills she'd been developing her entire life without realizing it. The academy was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous opponents were those who fought not for glory or honor, but simply because someone needed to be protected, and who had spent their lives learning how to win against superior odds through superior preparation and absolute refusal to give up. The individual combat assessment arena materialized around Maya like a digital dream becoming reality. The Academy's advanced holographic systems created an environment so realistic that she could smell the metallic tang of industrial air recycling and feel the slight vibration of machinery through the deck plating beneath her feet. She stood alone in what appeared to be a damaged space station, emergency lighting casting eerie shadows through corridors filled with floating debris. According to her mission briefing, hostile forces had infiltrated the station and were hunting her specifically. Her objective was simple in theory but challenging in practice. Survive for 30 minutes while gathering intelligence on enemy capabilities and positions. Maya checked her equipment one final time. Academy regulations limited her to standard-issue items available to all species: a basic energy weapon, a multi-tool, emergency medical supplies, and a communication device. No special accommodations for human physiology, no enhanced equipment to compensate for her species' perceived weaknesses. She moved through the initial corridor with careful precision, every sense alert for signs of danger. The artificial gravity was set to Academy standard, which meant she was operating at roughly 20% above Earth normal. For most students, this represented a manageable challenge. For Maya, who had trained her entire life in Earth gravity, it felt like being pressed down by invisible weights. The first sign of enemy presence came as a soft scraping sound from the corridor ahead. Maya pressed herself against the wall and listened carefully, trying to determine the number and nature of her opponents. The Academy's holographic opponents were programmed to behave like actual threats, with realistic movement patterns and tactical awareness. Through a gap in the damaged wall plating, she caught sight of her first enemy, a simulated Bracken mercenary armed with military-grade weapons and wearing combat armor that would make him nearly invulnerable to her standard energy weapon. The hologram moved with the characteristic aggressive confidence of a species bred for warfare, scanning for targets with predatory intensity. Maya's initial tactical assessment was sobering. The Bracken was faster, stronger, and better armed than she was. In a direct confrontation, she would last perhaps 30 seconds before being eliminated from the scenario. Traditional combat doctrine would suggest finding a defensive position and attempting to outlast her opponents, but Maya's strategic training told her that passive defense would eventually fail against superior forces. Instead, she began moving through the station's maintenance areas, using service tunnels and emergency access ways to observe enemy positions without being detected. The damaged station provided numerous opportunities for concealment, and Maya's smaller size allowed her to navigate spaces that larger opponents might find difficult. As she gathered intelligence, a tactical picture began to emerge. The simulated enemies were conducting a systematic search pattern, clearing sections methodically while maintaining communication with a central coordinator. Their approach was professional and efficient, exactly what she would expect from experienced military operators. Maya counted at least 6 opponents, possibly more, all equipped with superior weapons and armor. The conventional wisdom would be to avoid contact entirely, but the scenario's time limit made that approach impossible. Eventually, they would find her regardless of how well she hid. She needed to change the tactical situation to her advantage, and that meant thinking like a human rather than like a traditional warrior. Maya began her campaign not with direct action, but with information warfare. Using her multi-tool to access the station's communication systems, she began broadcasting false transmissions designed to confuse and misdirect her opponents. Emergency alerts about hull breaches in areas where she wasn't located, maintenance warnings about hazardous atmospheric conditions, and deliberately corrupted status reports that would make it difficult for enemies to distinguish real threats from manufactured ones. The effect was subtle but noticeable. Enemy movement patterns began to show slight hesitation as operators received conflicting information about environmental conditions. Search teams paused to verify reports of hazardous areas, and their systematic sweep became less systematic as they responded to false emergency signals. While her opponents dealt with information overload, Maya began the next phase of her strategy: environmental manipulation. The damaged station provided numerous opportunities for creative problem-solving. Power junction boxes could be overloaded to create localized blackouts. Atmospheric processors could be adjusted to create fog or unusual air pressure in specific areas. Emergency systems could be triggered to flood corridors with fire suppression foam. Maya worked her way through the station's infrastructure like a technician rather than a warrior, creating a gradually escalating series of environmental challenges that forced her opponents to divide their attention between finding her and dealing with apparent system failures. Alert: atmospheric breach detected in Section C7. She broadcast through the station's emergency system using codes she'd memorized from Academy technical training. All personnel evacuate immediately. Through her surveillance of enemy positions, she watched as 2 search teams responded to the false emergency, moving away from her actual location toward an area where she'd created a harmless but convincing simulation of atmospheric venting. The beauty of her approach was that every false alarm was based on real environmental hazards that could exist in a damaged space station. Her opponents couldn't simply ignore the warnings without risking exposure to actual dangers, but investigating each alert consumed time and resources that couldn't be devoted to finding her. 20 minutes into the scenario, Maya had reduced the effective search force from 6 opponents to 2, with the others scattered throughout the station responding to various manufactured emergencies. Now came the moment she'd been preparing for, direct engagement under conditions of her choosing. Her target was a lone Brocken who had been isolated from his team by a series of false alarms and deliberate misdirection. Maya had observed his movement patterns and identified a choke point where she could force him into a confrontation that minimized his advantages in strength and armor. Then she positioned herself in a maintenance junction where multiple corridors intersected, creating sightlines that favored her energy weapon's range while limiting his ability to use superior firepower. Then she triggered an emergency alert that would draw him directly into her prepared position. Emergency. Life support failure in Junction 7 Alpha, she broadcast. Maintenance personnel required immediately. The Bracken responded as she'd anticipated, moving quickly toward the supposed emergency. Maya waited until he was committed to the corridor approach before revealing her position and engaging with her energy weapon. The exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. The Bracken's superior armor protected him from her initial shots, but Maya had anticipated this and positioned herself so that his return fire would be partially blocked by structural elements. While he maneuvered for a better angle, Maya used her multi-tool to trigger an overload in nearby power systems. The resulting electrical discharge wouldn't have been dangerous to an unarmored opponent, but the Bracken's metal armor conducted the energy directly to his suit systems. His equipment suffered cascading failures, leaving him temporarily blinded and disoriented just long enough for Maya to score hits on vulnerable areas where his armor's protection was limited. Opponent neutralized. The Academy's monitoring system announced as the holographic Brocken dissolved. Student Chen, continue scenario. Maya didn't pause to celebrate. She immediately moved to a new position, knowing that the energy weapon discharge and electrical overload would have revealed her location to any remaining enemies. The scenario still had 8 minutes remaining, and her opponents would now be actively hunting for her rather than responding to false alarms. But something had changed in the tactical situation. Maya could hear increased communication between the remaining enemies, and their movement patterns showed signs of frustration and concern. They had lost team members to what appeared to be station malfunctions and equipment failures rather than direct combat, and they were beginning to question whether the environment itself might be compromised. Maya exploited this uncertainty by escalating her environmental manipulation. She triggered emergency evacuation protocols in multiple sections, created false atmospheric readings that suggested contamination, and used the station's automated systems to suggest that catastrophic failure was imminent. "All units, this is base," she transmitted using communication codes she'd observed. "Station integrity is failing faster than anticipated. Recommend immediate extraction." The response revealed exactly what she'd hoped to learn. Her opponents were part of a larger operation with external support, and they were just as concerned about their own survival as they were about completing their mission. "Base, this is team leader," came the reply. "Target is still at large, but station conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Multiple system failures, possible contamination. Request permission to abort mission." Maya felt a surge of excitement. She was winning not through superior firepower or combat skills, but by convincing her enemies that continuing their mission wasn't worth the risk to their own lives. "Negative, team leader," she responded, still using the compromised communication channel. "Priority target must be neutralized. Base is dispatching extraction team, but mission must be completed first." The frustrated anger in the team leader's response told Maya everything she needed to know about the effectiveness of her strategy. "Understood, base. Beginning final sweep, but this station is a death trap. Whatever intelligence said this would be a simple extraction was completely wrong." With less than 5 minutes remaining in the scenario, Maya made her final play. Instead of continuing to hide and evade, she revealed her position deliberately while simultaneously triggering every remaining environmental hazard she'd prepared. Lights went out throughout the station. Emergency alarms wailed from multiple locations. Atmospheric warnings indicated dangerous pressure changes. Fire suppression systems activated in random corridors, filling them with dense foam that made movement treacherous. And in the middle of this apparent catastrophic failure, Maya stood calmly in a central corridor with her weapon raised, waiting for her opponents to find her. They came quickly, the remaining 3 enemies converging on her position with obvious desperation to complete their mission before the station supposedly collapsed around them. But they arrived disoriented, partially blinded by the environmental chaos and expecting to find a cowering target rather than someone who appeared to be in complete control of the situation. Maya's final engagement lasted 30 seconds and utilized every advantage she'd created. Her opponents were hampered by poor visibility, uncertain footing due to fire suppression foam, and the constant distraction of emergency alarms. Maya, who had created all these conditions intentionally, moved through the chaos like someone who belonged there. She didn't try to match their firepower or armor. Instead, she used mobility and environmental awareness to stay ahead of their targeting while scoring precise hits on equipment vulnerabilities she'd identified through careful observation. Scenario complete, the Academy system announced as the last holographic opponent dissolved. All objectives achieved. Student Chen, report to debriefing station. Maya stood alone in the slowly dissolving holographic environment, breathing heavily but feeling a deep satisfaction that went beyond simple completion of an assignment. She had faced superior opponents under challenging conditions and succeeded not through matching their strengths, but by changing the nature of the conflict entirely. The debriefing station materialized around her, and she found herself facing Instructor Prime and Beta, both of whom were studying their tablets with expressions that mixed surprise with professional assessment. Student Chen, Prime began, his 3 eyes focusing on her with obvious curiosity. Your approach to this scenario was highly unconventional. Can you explain your tactical reasoning? Maya gathered her thoughts carefully, still processing the adrenaline from the engagement. I realized early on that I couldn't win in a direct confrontation, so I focused on changing the tactical environment to reduce my opponent's advantages. By creating uncertainty about station conditions and forcing them to divide their attention, I was able to engage them under circumstances that favored my capabilities rather than theirs. Beta made notes on her tablet. Your use of environmental manipulation and information warfare demonstrates sophisticated understanding of asymmetric conflict principles. Where did you learn these techniques? Human military history includes many examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through creative use of terrain and deception, Maya explained. I studied those historical examples and tried to apply the underlying principles to this scenario. Prime's expression showed what might have been approval. Student Chen, your performance exceeded expectations in several categories. Survival time, enemy neutralization, and environmental awareness all scored well above Academy averages for your species baseline. Maya felt a flutter of pride, but she also noticed something in Prime's tone that suggested there was more to come. However, Prime continued, your methods raise interesting questions about the nature of honorable combat. Several of your tactics involve deception, environmental manipulation, and psychological warfare. Some warrior traditions would consider such approaches dishonorable. It was a challenge Maya had expected and prepared for. Instructor, with respect, I think honor in combat should be measured by the protection of innocent lives rather than adherence to specific fighting traditions. My mission was to survive and gather intelligence, not to prove my courage in single combat. The methods I used achieved the objective while minimizing actual violence. Beta looked up from her tablet. An interesting perspective. Do you believe that effectiveness should take precedence over traditional concepts of warrior honor? Maya considered the question carefully. I believe that different situations call for different approaches. If protecting people requires me to fight honorably in single combat, then that's what I'll do. But if protecting people requires deception, environmental manipulation, or psychological warfare, then I'll use those methods instead. The goal determines the means, not the other way around. Prime and Beta exchanged glances that carried a conversation Maya couldn't quite interpret. Finally, Prime spoke again. Student Chen, your individual assessment results will be included in your overall academy file. You have demonstrated capabilities that were not anticipated based on initial species profiling. This will require adjustments to your training program." Maya felt a moment of concern. "Adjustments, instructor?" "Advanced tactical training," Beta explained. "Your performance indicates readiness for instruction typically reserved for second or third year students. You will continue with standard physical conditioning and weapons training, but you will also begin advanced strategic studies immediately." The implications of this announcement were significant. Maya had not only passed her individual assessment but had performed well enough to qualify for accelerated advancement. It was exactly what she'd hoped for, but also somewhat overwhelming to realize that her approach had impressed instructors who had probably seen thousands of students. "Thank you, instructors," she said formally. "I'll do my best to justify your confidence." As she left the debriefing station and returned to the academy's common areas, Maya found herself surrounded by curious classmates who had completed their own assessments. The conversations revealed a wide range of experiences and outcomes, with most students having approached the scenario through conventional combat methods. "Maya!" The massive Carathian was surrounded by other students, apparently sharing details of his own assessment. "How did your individual scenario proceed?" Before Maya could answer, Blade Strike approached from another direction, his expression showing unusual interest. "Human Maya, we heard rumors that you achieved something unusual in your assessment. Is it true that you neutralized multiple opponents without conventional combat?" Maya found herself the center of attention as students from various species gathered to hear about her experience. She gave them a brief summary of her tactics, focusing on the strategic principles rather than specific techniques. "Environmental manipulation and information warfare," mused Swiftwind, her gossamer wings fluttering thoughtfully. "These are not concepts emphasized in traditional Aurelian combat training." Resonance chimed approvingly. "Human tactical approaches continue to demonstrate innovative problem-solving. This unit requests additional information about historical precedents for such strategies." Maya found herself explaining human military history to an increasingly large and engaged audience. Stories of asymmetric warfare, technological innovation, and strategic deception that had allowed smaller forces to overcome superior opponents throughout Earth's history. "Your species appears to have developed warfare as a creative discipline rather than a purely physical one," observed a Zelvon student whose color patterns shifted rapidly with interest. "Most galactic military traditions focus on enhancing natural combat capabilities rather than developing entirely new approaches." A Thrakari student whose armor plates were decorated with battle honors looked skeptical. "These tactics may work against unprepared opponents, but what happens when enemies specifically train to counter human deception and environmental manipulation?" It was the same question Maya had been asking herself. "Then we'll have to develop new approaches," she said simply. "The key is to stay ahead of the adaptation cycle. When opponents learn to counter one set of tactics, you innovate new ones." Blade Strike nodded approvingly. "This is the essence of tactical evolution. A warrior who relies on the same techniques indefinitely will eventually face an opponent who has learned to counter them." The conversation continued late into the evening cycle, with students sharing tactical knowledge from their respective species and military traditions. Maya found herself serving as an informal instructor in human strategic thinking, while learning about Korathian strength techniques, Aurelian aerial combat methods, and Thrakari armor tactics. As the group finally dispersed to their quarters, Maya reflected on how much had changed since her arrival at the academy. She was no longer the fragile human who needed protection and special consideration. Instead, she was becoming recognized as a tactical asset with unique capabilities that contributed to overall team effectiveness. But more importantly, she was beginning to understand that human approaches to conflict had value not because they were superior to alien methods, but because they offered different solutions to the same fundamental problems. Diversity of tactical thinking made everyone stronger, just as diversity of species made the galaxy more resilient. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and advanced training that would test her capabilities even further. But Maya was no longer worried about proving that she belonged at the academy. She had demonstrated that humans could contribute meaningfully to galactic defense, and she was ready to show her instructors and classmates what else Earth's children were capable of when given the opportunity to excel. The Academy was about to discover that training a human in advanced tactical methods might produce results that no one had anticipated. Maya's individual assessment had been just the beginning of a learning curve that would challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare, honor, and the true nature of strength. As she settled into her quarters for the night, Maya looked forward to advanced training with the quiet confidence that had carried her through every challenge so far. She was ready to learn whatever the Academy could teach her, and to teach them a few things in return about what happened when humans decided that good enough simply wasn't good enough. Advanced Tactical Studies classroom bore little resemblance to the standard Academy training facilities. Maya entered to find a space that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with holographic displays, gravitational modeling systems, and what appeared to be real-time tactical simulations running along every available surface. The room hummed with an energy that spoke of serious intellectual work being conducted at the highest levels. She was early, as usual, but discovered she wasn't alone. 3 other students were already present, each representing species she hadn't encountered in first-year training. A tall, ethereal being with translucent skin that revealed flowing circulatory systems introduced herself as Mindweaver. Next to her sat what appeared to be a living geometric equation, constantly shifting between mathematical configurations, axiom, a representative of the computational nexus. The third student was surprisingly familiar in general form, but disturbing in specific details, Shadowblade, a Terran variant from one of the colony worlds where humans had undergone genetic modification for enhanced combat capabilities. "So you're the baseline human who's been causing such a stir?" Shadowblade said, his voice carrying an edge that Maya couldn't quite identify. Where she was small and apparently fragile, he was tall and obviously built for physical conflict with enhanced musculature, reinforced bone structure, and reflexes that had been improved beyond natural human limitations. "I don't know about causing a stir," Maya replied diplomatically. "I'm just trying to learn as much as I can." Mindweaver's laugh was like wind chimes touched by a gentle breeze. False modesty doesn't suit someone who achieved individual assessment scores high enough to qualify for advanced placement. Your tactical innovations have become case studies among the instructor corps. Axiom shifted through several geometric configurations before speaking in a voice that sounded like perfectly tuned mathematical equations. Query: do natural humans possess inherent tactical capabilities, or does Student Chen represent statistical anomaly? It was a question Maya had been wondering about herself. Was her strategic thinking representative of human potential, or was she simply an outlier whose capabilities didn't reflect the broader capabilities of her species? "I think most humans have the potential for strategic thinking," she said carefully. "We're raised in a competitive environment that rewards creative problem-solving, but I might have had more exposure to military history and tactical theory than most people my age." Shadowblade leaned forward with obvious interest. "Military theory? Baseline humans aren't supposed to have military traditions worth studying." The Galactic Assessment rated Earth military doctrine as primitive, but her educators thought she was frail. Then her fighting power shocked them. Best HFY Stories. HFY Stories.